welcome everyone to our Middle Ground Book Fest panel, Hook, Line, and Sinker, Engaging Reluctant Readers. I'm so excited to be moderating this panel, and I'll be participating a little bit. So we'll start with everyone introducing themselves, and I'll go first. My name is JL Esplin. It's my author name, JL Esplin. I'm the author of 96 Miles. I have it right here. Looks like this. It is, it's a survival adventure novel about two brothers who have to walk 96 miles down this Nevada highway, deserted highway in the middle of a massive blackout. When a massive blackout hits the Western United States, you would think I'd be good at pitching this book by this point, but I'm still like, what's it about again? So anyway, that's mine. And I'll kind of shout out names. So we'll start with Emily introducing herself.
Hi, my name is Emily Sawyer. I'm a teacher in Connecticut. I've been teaching 6th grade going on 6 years now. And my favorite part about teaching, I guess, is helping students kind of grow and sustain a love for reading. That's me.
Okay, great. And Karissa.
Hi, I'm Karissa Fast. I am a public librarian in St. Catharines, Ontario. It's near Niagara Falls. And I'm also the writer of the blog Ontarian Librarian.
Okay, great. Arianne.
Hi, my name is Arianne Costner, and I wrote My Life as a Potato. It came out earlier this year, and it's about a kid who moves to Idaho, and he ends up becoming the Spud mascot at his new school, and he gets into all sorts of trouble trying to keep it a secret from everybody.
Okay, and Summer.
Hi, I am Summer Rachel Short, and I'm the author of The Mutant Mushroom Takeover, which is about a aspiring naturalist and her YouTuber best friends who have to save their small town from a mutant fungus takeover. So,
okay, Tania.
Hi, I'm Tania del Rio, and I'm the author of the War in the 13th trilogy, and it's about a cursed 12-year-old bellhop who runs his family's ancient, mysterious traveling hotel.
Okay, great. And Doug.
Hi, I'm Doug Cornett. I wrote Finally Something Mysterious. It's a middle grade mystery set in a small town, and it starts when a whole bunch of little rubber duckies like this guy show up in somebody's backyard. And so a trio of young detectives has to figure out what's going on. Oh, and I'm also a teacher. I've been teaching high school and middle school English for 10 years now.
Okay, all right, great. Well, I'm really excited to be moderating this panel, especially because growing up, I had a deep, passionate hatred of books. I did not read. I didn't start reading until I was an adult. So it's kind of, crazy that I ended up being a writer of, books for kids. And so this is something I'm always really, interested in and talking about this. I love talking about this topic. So we'll start with my first question is going to be for Karissa and Emily, kind of getting a teacher librarian perspective here. And we'll start by just defining the term reluctant reader. And then also the second part of that question will be, what are some of the reasons why a student or a child might be a reluctant reader? So kind of defining what reluctant reader means in the classroom and what it means in the library, and if you use that term. And so we'll start with Karissa and then go to Emily.
All right. Okay, so for me, a reluctant reader is kind of like the opposite of an avid reader. It's a kid who does not think of themselves as a reader type, and they might not even choose to read ever. So, but as librarians and teachers, we know that everyone is a reader type. We just have to find them the right book. So I'm so glad you asked what are some of the reasons why, because sometimes we kind of get stuck in thinking that reluctant readers are this one type of kid who has a low reading level and just wants to play video games all the time. But that is not always the case. There definitely are kids who love video games more than reading, but reluctance to read can look really different on different kids. And if we can identify why they're reluctant to read, it's a lot easier to connect them with a book. So I have a list. I'll just tell you some of the things on here to just to open our minds to different possibilities. So yeah, they could have a low reading level or a learning disability that makes them intimidated to read. Maybe they don't think it's cool, or none of their friends read. Maybe they've never been exposed to reading, like growing up, no one they knew read, their parents didn't read. Maybe they never connected with a book before, and like as soon as they do, they're not a reluctant reader anymore. It could be that they just don't see themselves reflected in any of the stories that they've been given, and that's a huge problem in libraries and publishing. Could be that they're very picky. I really like working with middle grade kids, but it is a time when they're shifting identities a lot, and they might be really particular about the media that they consume. So that's a hard one. Could be that their parents force them to read certain books that they hate. I could talk about that for a long time. Or, and this is kind of a backwards one, they might feel underestimated by the teachers and librarians in their life. So it could be that they've always been seen as a reluctant reader, and they've always been given high-low books that are way below their age level. And that's kind of why we need to try and figure out why they're a reluctant reader instead of just giving them whichever easy book we think. So yeah, I'm interested in what Emily says.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Sorry. I definitely hear Karissa of what a reader is, and for me personally, my experience, I kind of see the term reluctant reader as like a fluid term. I kind of see it more as like a temporary setback with a child's love for reading, for whatever reason it may be. And just to go on to that next question of like what might be some reasons, just to piggyback on what I said, all great points. But I definitely see some other aspects, and there's a myriad of reasons why someone could be a reluctant reader, why a child may feel like there's a barrier. It might be because there's been a lack of choice with their reading, which is a huge piece in any classroom. So I try to be a big proponent of choice. It might also be that they just haven't found the genre that they really love. They may have been reading, fantasy for years and years and years. Maybe there's a social pressure there where all their friends are reading fantasy, and they don't like Harry Potter and they don't like the Lightning Thief series. And it was never their cup of tea, but they felt that social pressure to join in that way. But I definitely kind of view my classroom as like a place where students can find what they actually like and what they truly enjoy, and kind of diving into like their past reading life really helps uncover those answers and kind of dissecting why they're in the place that they are.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to a question that I have for the writers on our panel here. So this is for Arianne, Summer, Doug, and Tania. So what are some of your writing strategies for hooking readers? And do you think about hooking reluctant readers while you're writing? Or do you just write to everybody? So we'll start with Summer.
Yeah, I do think about that. Some of the things I think about are like maybe kid-friendly word choices, like we're trying to have a kid-friendly voice with writing, but also, not saying things in maybe a more dry or an adult-like way that might just bore kids. So I also try to use humor. I think humor is a good way. If kids are laughing, a lot of times they're going to continue reading. And then I think also maybe introducing something that stirs their curiosity. I think if, whether that's mystery or adventure or whatever it is, but I think if they're curious, then they're more likely to continue reading.
Okay, great. And then Tania.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Summer said. I think a lot of reluctant readers like to latch onto characters. So I always think about really interesting characters in my stories and try to use that as a hook for readers. Because if you find a character that you love, you're more likely to keep reading. So in my stories, there's a big cast of characters and they're all very different. So I'm hopeful that there's a reader out there that will latch onto one of them and want to keep reading the books to learn more about the character and what adventures they go on.
Yeah. Okay, and Arianne.
So something I really like to do is play with situational humor. It's my favorite type of humor, and because for me, I'm always more attracted to books that can make me laugh. And I like to play off of scenarios that the students might encounter in real life. So I play a lot off of awkwardness with someone you have a crush on, or awkwardness of like trying to act cool when you're really not. Like a short little example is once when Ben is in the potato suit, I always think like, what's the most awkward, funny thing that could happen? And he ends up, you can kind of see there's like spot illustrations, crashing into the cheerleader pyramid. Oh no, what if that's worse? Because his crush is a cheerleader, and she ends up like eating the potato mascot, but she doesn't know who he is. And I don't know, just like trying to think of ironic scenarios.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then Doug.
Well, yeah, I agree with all of you guys. Arianne, I definitely agree with your point about awkwardness. I have a lot of that in my personal life, and so I think and kids do too as well. And so writing about that and writing humor in those scenarios is really important. I also think I actually don't really think about reluctant readers when I write. I think about the kind of book that I would have wanted to read as a kid. And so thinking about like keeping the pace going a lot of like healthy doses of humor. And I'm totally a sucker for a cliffhanger, and it drives me crazy when I read books that have cliffhanger endings, because I just have to keep reading. So that's what I think about when I write.
Yeah. So are you thinking cliffhanger like at the end of a chapter, or at the end of your book? Yeah,
at the end of a chapter, yeah.
At the end of a chapter, yeah. I'll answer this question too. So I do the same. I think about the end of my chapter, because you never want to like give them a reason to put the book down. You know, ending a chapter is a good point to like set it down and go get something to eat. You know, so you want to make sure they have to turn the next page. But and so pacing is a big thing I think about when I'm writing. I don't know that I specifically think reluctant reader. I think of readers in general, and that's how I read. So kind of my answer is kind of like Doug, that's what I would want to read, is something that keeps moving. But something that I learned probably more from my editor kind of pushed me more. I have a really like brilliant editor. Her name is Susan Chang. And she pointed out all of the beginning of every chapter. You know, as a writer, sometimes you want to just like, let's ease it into the next chapter. And like, before we get started, I got to describe this bush over here. It's really interesting. And then this tree, and, you know, get the whole setting laid out before we start going. And so that's something that now, you know, that as I'm writing now, before I even turn anything into my editor, I'm thinking about my chapter beginning. And so I don't like to have big chunks of description. I try to kind of like weave the description in with like a dialogue tag, or kind of weave it throughout, instead of saying, here's what it looks, here's the setting, here's some dialogue, and then here's more setting down here. So that's probably the biggest thing I do with like pacing. I also like to have a lot of dialogue. It's the first part that I write in a scene, is the dialogue. And so those are my pointers for writing something for reluctant readers. But okay, so we're gonna go back to Emily and Karissa with this one. So this is kind of a two-parter question. I don't know if I should ask them separately. I'll ask them separate. That way we can kind of keep it, you know, your answers controlled a little bit. And but so what are the biggest challenges when it comes to finding books for reluctant readers? And so, Karissa, do you want to talk about that first, and then Emily, or did we go the other way? We'll go the other way. So Emily and then Karissa. So what are the biggest challenges when it comes to finding books for reluctant readers?
In my experience as a classroom teacher, one of the biggest challenges to finding books, when it comes to finding books for reluctant readers, is definitely getting kids to buy into like a love of reading. I feel like some reluctant readers have been in such a reading rut for so long that they've almost like given up hope that they'll ever love reading again. So to combat that, I personally feel that you need time, and you need repeated exposure to different genres. So in the end, it may take like months to coax a reluctant reader to even consider picking up a book. So patience is definitely key. And then along those same lines of being in a classroom and needing time, time constraints are also a really big challenge as a teacher, especially in the middle ground. For example, my classes are 40 minutes apiece. So it really gets shaved down and shaved down and shaved down, and then you end up having 3 minutes to kind of dive into their past reading life, and then another 3 to 5 minutes to get them to try a few genres, and then all of a sudden whoosh, they're out the door and the books are still on the desk. And so it definitely takes some time and some patience, and those are two pretty big challenges as a classroom teacher, to find books for reluctant readers.
Okay, and then Karissa, what's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I totally identify with everything Emily said too. And there's so many different challenges. Like we could talk for a long time about this, but one that I have started thinking about more recently is, as librarians and teachers, our own internalized stereotypes about what a kid might want to read. So, for example, this is like a daily occurrence where a kid or a parent and a kid would come into the library and like need help finding a book because the kid hates to read. And sometimes you'll see a certain kid and you might think, oh, I know what they want to read just based on how they look, what age they are, what gender they look like. So for example, let's say a grade 8 boy. You might make the assumption that they want to read action, adventure, comedy. And that could be true, but if we don't offer them all the different books beyond that, we could be doing them a huge disservice. And I've started to do this, and even though it might feel awkward at first, I've like asked grade 8 boys if they want a rom-com, and they say yes sometimes, and then they love it. So yeah, that's something I've started to do consistently. I've kind of like developed a little speech that I'll say to every kid, no matter who they are, about what types of stories we have and what they would like. And that kind of just shows them that we are a judgment-free area. Like we aren't going to hold them to the constraints of like what people think they should read. And yeah, if we don't do that, if we don't open our own minds to what they might want to read, we are creating reluctant readers probably by like boxing them in. And then another huge challenge is parents who only want their kids to read the classic.
Oh, really?
Or they only want their kids to read books that they read when they were a kid. And something that you can do for that is like, sometimes I just talk about how amazing the middle grade market is right now and how it's in such a period of growth, and there's so many different types of stories. I'll talk about the quality of writing, and sometimes that wins the parent over, and the kid doesn't have to read Hatchet or
hey.
But if not, if you don't want to read it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know that you're like have to, the parent matters as much as the kid sometimes, and kind of getting them on the same page there. So, okay, so kind of my second part to that question is, what are your strategies in the classroom and the library for connecting them with the right book? So where do you find books, and what are kind of your strategies for doing that? So do you want to answer first, Emily?
Sure. Okay. Like Karissa said, I feel like I can go on and on, especially with this question about strategies, especially in the classroom. But me personally, I always try to really dig deep with students that seem to be in a reading rut, and ask those really like nitty-gritty questions, like how long have you been uninterested in reading? When was the last time you really enjoyed a book? Is there a certain genre that you absolutely hate? Is there one that you feel like you might like if you tried it? And additionally, I go beyond just the books that they've read in the past. I also ask them about what movies or TV shows they like as well. So if a student told me that they hated the Harry Potter movies, which I try to hold my reaction, but they hated Harry Potter and they really liked Marvel movies, I can kind of get a sense that they don't necessarily like fantasy maybe, but they might like a more action-packed story. And I also pry into their hobbies, connecting a reluctant reader with a book that includes their hobby, like sport or pastime. It can really be a connection into the real reading world that's a connection to their real lives. And a really big part of this is just like sitting down with the student and getting a sense of who they are, and their personality and their likes and their dislikes. Even just in conversation with someone, if one of my students is a little bit more sarcastic, I know they might like, the insignificant events in their life of the cactus. Versus like, are they a more serious sports player? Maybe they like the Ghost series by Jason Reynolds. So I kind of do a lot of work at the beginning of the year to kind of just like kind of pick apart their interests and be able to really recommend books that they will really like. And I also play around with suggesting different formats as well. Graphic novels, I feel like, are a great segue to some low-key reading, but it's also really powerful and important reading. I might also suggest short stories or books written in prose, and even having friends suggest books to each other, and create mini book clubs throughout the year to kind of get reluctant readers to buy in and get a little hooked socially. And so a few other strategies are, implementing turning talks at least 2 or 3 times a week in my classroom that have to do with books that they're currently reading or have read and they really want to recommend, just to hear from their peers. And I also have students complete book reviews to kind of like put up around the room and have those visuals as well. But at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to what I said to answer that the previous question, which is a student just needs time. That's one of my biggest strategies. Even though I have the time constraint of 40 minutes, I dedicate at least 15 minutes, if not more, every day to some reading and trying to foster a love of reading through, community in the classroom. So I could go on, but that's just a short list of some of the strategies I use to hook some reluctant readers in my classroom.
Yeah, that's great. And then Karissa?
Yeah, so similar to what I said, if it's a one-on-one reference interview about this, the first thing I'll do is to find out what kind of stories they like. And I love that you said this about like, you can ask about movies or video games or hobbies, because if a kid doesn't like to read, that question right away is going to make them shut down. What kind of books do you like? And something that I try to do with patrons of any age at this point in the reference interview is help them figure out why they like all the things that they like. So, like, for example, if they'll tell me 3 different movies, we'll try to work together to find out why they like, what's the common thing and the common thread in that item. And that's a skill that they can apply when they're trying to find books for themselves that might like even teach them something about themselves. So after that, so I have like a good sense of what they like, we're going to take a tour of the fiction section. So we walk, it's really casual, and I'll pull off books and I'll do like a 1 sentence, like, this is what happens in this book. And for reluctant readers, any book that has a really, really quick, easy premise, like all of the books written by the authors on this panel, they are really good. Like anytime I see a book like that, I'm like, okay, this is going to be one that I can book talk quickly and easily to reluctant readers. And also I'll tell them with my book here, like, I'm going to tell you about some books and you might not want them, and that's okay. And saying that seems so simple, but you can see something in their eyes click when they hear that. That's like a huge relief. They don't have to read this if they don't want. And that kind of like shifts their thinking and changes their perspective of reading, which is really powerful. So yeah, so then I'll sit them down with 3 to 5 books and let them look at them by themselves. So give them some autonomy, and then encourage them to take home as many as were interesting to them. Especially because if they just take one, and that is often I've found with the reluctant readers, they just want to take one because it maybe seems too intimidating to take more than one. But I tell them to take multiple, because imagine you're a reluctant reader and you get home and you have this book, you have such high hopes, and you start reading it and you just don't connect with it. That would be so devastating. Like you thought you did it. And then, so also it's great if people are checking out multiple things, right? So yeah. And I just think there's nothing better than like sitting at home with a stack of books and like reading through them. And then I'll quickly say another strategy is I do these like big book talk events, like field trips, so kids can come in with their class. And it's kind of like I want it to have the same vibe as, like an Apple announcement when they like release their new technology. That's what I want my like show to be. And so I'll do quick book talks, and I should write a blog post about this. But the main takeaway is I always ask kids after my book talk to raise their hand if they think they want to read that book. It's really interesting. The first book talk, maybe a quarter of the kids raise their hand, but by the last book talk, almost every kid is raising their hand. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And one of them is they're seeing their peers really excited about reading. And I've heard from teachers that is so helpful for their reluctant readers who like now maybe they weren't reading because they thought it was like really uncool. But if everyone's reading and everyone's excited, it's contagious.
Yeah. A little peer pressure. No. Okay, so hearing you guys talk, it's like I'm thinking of all these questions and things. I'm curious, any writers are thinking of something they want to add, or you had a thought based on what you heard? No?
Well, something that I taught 7th grade English, and we would do book tasting at the beginning of the year, kind of playing off cheese tasting, where we would just sit in a circle and I'd have like a huge stack of books and we'd pass them around. I'd give them 2 minutes to just kind of like flip through the book, like as if they were at a library, and like read the back cover, read the first page, maybe flip into the middle, read like a few sentences. And then they would write down on a scale of 1 to 10 how interested they were in the book, and maybe a sentence about like their first impression or why they would want to read it, just to kind of practice, choosing what they like to read. And then one more thing is always emphasizing at the beginning of the year that if they don't want to finish a book they started, that's okay. Because I think that's something that might be kind of ingrained in a lot of us, is like, if I start a book, I have to finish it. And that really puts a burden on the reader. If you don't like something, you can just pick out another book, and that the teacher's not going to get mad at you.
Yeah,
that's great.
Okay. All right. So my next question I have is I actually wanted to hear from Tania to talk a little bit about comic books, because I know you also is Warren the 13th. Is that technically a comic or no? It's like
a highly illustrated middle grade novel. So it's not a comic book, but it's sort of a hybrid. It's got a lot more illustrations than your average middle grade novel. But yeah, and I did get my start in comics. I worked in comics for about 10 or 15 years before Warren came out. So
yeah. Okay. So my question is, can you talk a little bit about how comic books help build literacy and how they're important for reluctant readers?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm just so glad that graphic novels and comics are much more accepted today than they were when I started working in them, because they used to have a stigma that they weren't as sophisticated, or that they were lesser than books, prose books. And so I think that's really changing thanks to a lot of really fantastic graphic novels that are out now and still continuing to come out. And I think that what some people don't realize is that graphic novels and comics is its own visual language that requires skill to master. It's not, you may think it's easy to read a comic because it's illustrations and bubbles of text, but it takes its own skill to navigate the panels and to kind of read between the panels and kind of string them together in a way that's cohesive. And so I think if anything, it really strengthens a reader's ability to jump to prose. And not only that, but the visuals of comics kind of builds their own idea, their own imagination, and gives them the ability to visualize when they're reading prose, and kind of think, rather than just seeing a string of letters on a page that might be intimidating to someone, they can really kind of get into the story and start to fill in the visuals in their head. And I think that comics sort of teaches you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know the first time I read a graphic novel, it was like a little bit of a learning curve, having to really read the pictures. You have to read what's happening in the pictures. So, okay. So my next question is for everybody. Growing up, what kind of stories hooked you, and how does that influence what you write today? So you can kind of talk about a little bit about your book too, if you're a writer. And then it might also influence, our teacher and librarian, maybe hopefully some of the books you read. So we'll start with Summer, if you can.
Okay. Well, I liked a lot of different types of books as a kid. I don't know. I liked like friendship stories and sci-fi, and also like choose your own adventure books, or like Sweet Valley High. I don't know. I think I would read just about anything, as long as it didn't seem boring to me. So that's sort of something I go off of now. Like I don't want things to be boring. It's like it could be sad, or it could be happy, or it could be weird, but I would prefer to not be boring.
Yes.
So Yeah, and I think that's something I try to keep in mind, that people have short attention spans. I feel like I have a short attention span, and so I think always trying to be mindful that kids, probably even more so today, just with the abundance of screens we all have, that the attention span can be pretty short if something gets boring. So that's something I remember.
Okay, and then Doug, what about you? What kind of books did you read growing up, and how does that influence you?
I was all over the place as a kid, but I wanted to make the point that was made earlier that about representation, and maybe sometimes a reluctant reader is somebody who is not seeing themselves represented. And as a white boy, I had no problem finding myself in stories, and so that was never an issue for me. And I didn't even think about that as an issue. So that tells you a lot about the state of publishing then and still. So I think that's a really important point. That being said, for me, it was I loved interactive stories. So I was a huge mystery hound. Ellen Raskin's The Westing Game was and still is my favorite mystery because I had the notebook out and I was making notes on all the characters, and I had like my own ideas on what the solution was, and that kind of interaction is still my favorite kind of novel. Choose Your Own Adventure. I had that was like my guilty pleasure. I'd go to the bookstore and just buy like 50 Choose Your Own Adventures. I spent a lot of time reading those as a kid. And in terms of like writing my own novel, I just kept thinking, how can I make this interactive in a way where the kids can read this and actually solve the mystery if they're paying attention? And so if they are taking note of small details here and there, I want them to read the solution at the end and then flip back through the book and be like, oh, it was there, or to feel like they've solved it. And that's a wonderful feeling. You never feel smarter than when you've solved the mystery. And so that's kind of what my inspiration was.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, Arianne.
Yeah, kind of similar to you were saying that you didn't read too much, right?
I didn't read at all. Literally not at all.
Okay, well, I read a little bit, but I also kind of, I went through a phase where I wasn't a huge reader. I think probably like middle school. I read a lot as a kid, but then in middle school, I think I just lost interest. And I think that happens with a lot of kids around that age. It stops being cool, or I'm not even sure why I stopped reading. But when I was younger and read, I always remember gravitating towards, things with humor like Judy Blume or the Junie B. Jones, like that kind of thing. So I think that does influence what I write. I like a lot of realistic scenarios. I was always interested in school stories like Frindle and things like that. So it definitely still influences me.
Yeah. Okay, and then Tania.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like Doug in summer that I read a lot of different things growing up, comics and pretty much books in every single genre. So I didn't have a problem with that. But as far as like what I really like to read, I really love Roald Dahl because of his crazy characters, and I love the illustrations. So I think that kind of inspired me to write Warren a lot of his work, and Babysitter's Club, which is now is making a resurgence with the show, which is awesome. But yeah, I just loved slice of life kind of stories and things I could relate to in that sense.
Yeah. Okay, Karissa.
Yeah, I also read a lot of different types of books, but I remember really loving Redwall, the Redwall series, and Series of Unfortunate Events, and The Guardians of Ga'Hoole, which was the series about owls going on adventures. And how does that influence my work now? I think I remember just like the pure joy of going to the library and seeing that there was a new Redwall book there and being able to take that home. And I guess like I want kids to experience that same joy. So if I can help a kid get to that point, then that's ideal. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, and Emily.
Yeah, growing up, I definitely loved series. So Judy Jones, Magic Treehouse series, the Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter series. I also loved the series of Unfortunate Events. I wasn't necessarily tied to a specific genre, but I could definitely see that I was more fantasy driven. But even as I got older, I started to read a lot more like kind of slice of life, realistic fiction book. And I guess to take that into like my teaching life, I just make sure that, kids know and understand that, you know, your tastes change. And that's okay. Change is okay in that aspect. And I also, back to Doug's point, try to make sure that there's, you know, representation, and if a kid hasn't experienced, you know, a certain, you know, story and you know, tying in historical fiction and things like that, I always try to offer up something that might change what they like. Okay. Because that was offered to me, thankfully, as I was growing up. So that's what I try to do as a teacher.
Yeah, I think, I'm assuming that as we improve our representation to get better at it, you know, I'm excited to see there, you know, be less of a, you know, an issue with reluctant readers. So I think that that's something that can be really exciting, that can happen soon. It should happen. It should happen sooner than it's happening. So, okay, I didn't read as a kid. Like I said, I really did not read. I struggled with learning to read, and, you know, I just wasn't getting it. I was that kid that was kind of in the special reading group, taken out of the class. Like, why can't she read? She doesn't know how to read. And I finally just kind of accepted that, like, I can't read. I'm a bad reader. And now I just need to own that and let everybody know that I can't read. So don't expect me to read. I would like introduce myself on the first day of school as like, and I hate books, you know, so that my teachers wouldn't expect me to read a book. So anyway, so I don't have any books that I read as a kid, but I read all of these books as an adult. I started reading like in early 20s, and it was like, wow, I would have loved to read these as a kid had I, you know, had it clicked with me or something. So, but anyway, so my last question, I think we're kind of wrapping up here. I would like to hear everyone's current recommendation for reluctant readers. So you can be really quick and just hold up the book. If you have it, you don't have to have the book. And we'll just kind of go around really quick. We'll start with Karissa.
Okay, well, I would recommend any book by any of the authors on this panel, honestly. Like, seriously, I read My Life as a Potato. And it was so funny. Like, it was so easy to get a kid to read that at the library. Like, this is a book about a kid who's cursed by potatoes, and he has to be a potato. Like, who's not going to read that?
That makes me feel so good.
Yeah. And honestly, all the other books as well. Bloom is the one that I recently read. It's by Kenneth Oppel. He's a Canadian author. And this is a story about, it has a really good premise, which makes it good for reluctant readers. It's about basically alien plants that start to take over the world. And there's these 3 young teens who are immune to the plant's poisons, and they have to save the world. The premise is great, but then once you start reading, like, the characterization is amazing. The pacing is so good. So it hooks a kid, and then it keeps them hooked. And like you said before, every chapter ends in a cliffhanger, so they're not going to put the book down. And then also I recently read Stand Up, Yumi Chung, and the premise is it's a kid who wants to be a stand-up comedian. That's like, who doesn't want to read that? So good.
Okay, and Emily.
As far as, I haven't read these recently, but as far as books that can hook a reluctant reader, my 2 of my go-tos that kids will love are Fish in a Tree. And also a lot of kids that are, you know, wanting that connection to historical fiction love Red Fairies, White Cloud, Blue Sky. It's written in prose. So those are 2 that I kind of like play around with and have them preview. But personally, I just read Janae from the Desk of Zoe Washington, and that character development blew my mind. And I definitely want to start bringing more, you know, different voices into my classroom. So I have that, and I was, you know, Angie Thomas is on the come up. Definitely not necessarily for a reluctant reader, but yeah, two reads that I just finished up at the start of the summer that are great.
Yeah. Okay, Summer.
I was going to say Pie in the Sky. That's it has quite a few illustrations. It's not a graphic novel, but has quite a bit of illustrations, and it's funny. And I read that. My son read it and enjoyed it. And this other one, it is a graphic novel. I don't know if you can see it. It's Zita, the Spacegirl. It's a series. My daughter is a reluctant reader, and she's really liking these because they're the high interest, but they're really engaging for us. So those are two that we've recently been enjoying around here. So.
Yeah, great. Okay, Tania.
Yeah, so right now, I have it right here, Storm Runner by J.C. Cervantes. I as a Mexican American kid, I would have killed to have read something like this when I was a kid. Like, it was just the folklore and the adventure, and it's just so much fun. So I'm really glad that Rick Riordan Presents is offering so many stories with very different, diverse characters, and it's great.
Yeah. Okay, Arianne.
Okay, I actually have three, so I'll be really fast. Merci Suarez Changes Gears started this one. It has a fantastic voice. She's a sixth grader. And it's kind of funny, but also she has a grandfather with Alzheimer's. Greatest zombie movie ever. This one is for older, I would say maybe like sixth grade, seventh graders, but this book made me laugh more than any book has ever made me laugh. I love it. And then I very recently read Stepmom Shakeup. Cracked me up. So funny. It's kind of like Parent Trap, but more modern. And then I also just have to plug Jenny's book and Doug's books. Love them. And Summer, I'm really excited for your book, and I need to read Tanya's book. So I just want to read everyone's book here. But I have read theirs, and they're fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Doug.
Awesome, thank you. And so many of the suggestions that you guys made, I also second and love. Arianne, and I have your book right here prominently displayed on the bookshelf. So yeah, that one's hilarious. And then one that my wife and I are actually reading right now. It's Nick Stone's Clean Getaway. And we're reading it. We have a 6-month-old, and so we're getting up a lot in the middle of the night. And that's our time to read when one of us is feeding, the other one is reading the book. And so we're reading it in these like bleary middle of the night sessions. But it's a perfect book for that because it's voice heavy, and you get so wrapped up in the characters and their dynamic, but and you also realize that you're learning a whole lot about just the civil rights era. And so Nick Stone's Clean Getaway, I highly recommend.
Yes, I read that one too. I loved it. Okay, so these are mine. Wink. Has anybody read this? Oh, the camera is weird.
I've seen it everywhere.
Rob I'm really bad at pronunciation. Harrell. I love this book. It's about a kid who has this rare type of cancer in his eye, and kind of the drama of, going through that while they're in middle school. But it's also like a band origin story, because he gets really into guitar and they start this band. And I don't know, I teach guitar. And so, and I also have, my son was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year. So this one really spoke to me. And then, of course, from the desk of Zoe Washington, really, really compelling and with a lot of heart. And I think that's probably the two things that get me, is that like compelling, angle, and then the heart, having a lot of emotion and heart in there. So, and I think that's it. I think we'll wrap it up with that. And thanks everyone for participating and having such great answers and keeping the conversation going. So, and we will now say goodbye. Thanks everyone for attending our panel.
Bye, thank you.